Hello and welcome to the second edition of Classic Nic Cage Film Reviews. For this video we will be reviewing the 2019 film Color Out of Space, based on the H.P. Lovecraft short story of the same name. Like the short story, this movie is very much in the science fiction horror genre. Nic Cage plays a character named Nathan Gardner who moves with his family to a remote farmhouse in the hills of Arkham, Massachusetts. The plot revolves around an alien meteor that crash lands on the family's property and begins to infect the surrounding land and slowly drive each member of the family crazy. This movie was directed by Richard Stanley, and alongside Nic Cage, the primary supporting cast comprised of Jolie Richardson, Madeline Hunter, and Elliot Knight. Also, Tommy Chong has a bit part in this movie, playing a hermit hippie that's living in the hills, that is actually the only character that truly understands what's happening. So I found at the beginning this movie stumbles a bit to find its footing in its first scenes. In my opinion, I just feel like it was either a combination or one of the two of the acting and the dialogue just feeling very contrived and cliche. It doesn't really feel natural, and once we get through that intro period of sort of establishing the setting and the character dynamics, then it starts to feel a little bit more natural and not feel as forced as it does at the start. The one thing that is super strange about this movie is its obsession with alpacas. Nic Cage seems to love his alpacas that he has on his farm here. And it makes for some really weird scenes and some really strange dialogue that I don't really know what to do with. I would say one of those scenes is this one.
Do you think it's radioactive? Like kryptonite?
Christ, I hope not.
Well, what about like an alien virus? I mean, it's from space, right?
Meteorites are generally no more dangerous than ordinary rocks.
Well, do you think it could be valuable?
Well, that's something I hadn't considered. Now, if you don't mind, it's time we milk the alpacas.
Milk for what?
It's not like milking a goat. You don't get a lot of milk from an alpaca. It takes great patience, technique, and of course you have to be very gentle with the boobs. But once you get them warmed up...
Oh, nice one, Dad.
Yeah, I find mixing a little fennel into their feed increases the yield and improves the flavor. Would you like a taste?
Oh, no. Oh, lactose intolerant.
Your loss.
And some of the lines like this, that...
They are alpacas. Alpacas.
I don't know what they were trying to go for, but it's something, and it's certainly memorable. As we get midway into the movie and we start to see these characters starting to be affected by this alien life form, Nic Cage's character's change becomes really apparent really fast, and we sort of see this flip where he goes into this accent, this really kind of strange, weird accent that he does.
Holy shit. They should have been put back in the barn hours ago. You haven't even fed them yet, have you?
And for people that aren't as familiar with his movies, it might just seem like, oh, okay, this is where like this character is changing. We're going to see some rising action happening. But for others that are a little bit more familiar with some of his other movies, you'll quickly recognize this accent as the one that he uses in the 1989 movie Vampire's Kiss.
That's Frank Heatherton on the phone, for me. Now, I'm sure he is calling about the Der Spiegel contract, which he still hasn't gotten a copy of. How do I know he hasn't gotten a copy of it? Because I haven't sent it to him. Why haven't I sent it to him? Because you haven't found it and brought it to me yet. Now it's fucking Tuesday, and I still don't see it here on my desk. I don't see it here. Do you?
where he famously took that accent from people like Donald Trump, of all people, although this was 1989. And it's very striking to someone that's familiar with his movies because he's more or less pulling out one of his voices from a previous movie. And for me, I found that the way he kind of utilizes the voice is a little jarring. It doesn't quite fit because it's such a dramatic shift. And he seems to be the only character that kind of experiences that kind of change. And I guess it just kind of goes to show you that, like vampires kiss,
It never just goes away.
one thing that we are seeing for the first time is the Nic Cage freakout.
Nic Cage freakout.
Nic Cage freakout. Nic Cage freakout.
So, this is very much a documented thing. There are a lot of YouTube comps. There's actually been a lot of movies that he's done since some of these YouTube comps were released. And some of his older, more obscure roles that don't have them. But we see the Nic Cage freakout. So what comprises a Nic Cage freakout? Well, there's general shouting. There's usually some very strange body movements, kind of in the upper body region and the arms. A lot of swearing. And it's just a general outburst that kind of comes out of nowhere. And it lasts anywhere from about 30 seconds to a minute. And then from whence it came, it disappears again.
You fucking cocksucker! You cocksucker! You cocksucker! Ah, 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 ah,
And for some people they love it, some people they hate it. For most, it definitely doesn't always fit. It can be pretty jarring. I found that in this case it actually worked pretty well. Kind of makes sense as to why he's freaking out. But every time you see one in a Nic Cage movie, it is very clear what he's doing. If you want to get an understanding of the vibe going into the latter half of the movie, it gets to the point where Nick can just walk into a room looking like this, and no one's really freaking out anymore. That's basically par for the course at this point. I will say a lot of the visual effects of the mutations that happen to some of the characters and the wildlife in the movie remind me a lot of the John Carpenter movie The Thing and its sequel / prequel also called The Thing. And that might have been kind of the inspiration for it, but there's one scene in particular involving all of the alpacas that is really reminiscent of The Thing, for sure. So I'm wondering if that was some inspiration there. So in terms of my rating for this movie, I would probably give it a solid 6.5 to 7 out of 10. The reason being is, like I said at the beginning, and at some points in the movie, you just see some very generic horror movie tropes that I think could have been avoided. Particularly, like I said, in these introduction scenes where we're kind of establishing the characters and the setting. There's one thing in particular that's very hard to bring to the screen. So in the original story, a lot of the characters describe this life form as simply a color that they cannot describe or have never really seen before. And they do that in the movie. And unfortunately, because we're watching this on the screen as opposed to reading it, it's harder to depict that. On the page, we can sort of imagine what's happening, imagine this color that is indescribable, that is unknown to us on the color spectrum. And being on a screen, we can't replicate that. We can't replicate a new color on the screen because our light spectrum is limited. And they utilize a lot of pinks, purples, and blues. These are really vibrant, almost like neon colors that they're using to kind of recreate this color. However, the positive aspects of this movie is that I feel really engaged throughout the whole thing. I do want to see this movie through to the end. I am interested in kind of seeing how things are wrapped up, what the conclusion is. The sense of suspense is really well done with this movie. There's a lot of good scares, a lot of good kind of what you'd call like just some freaky scenes. And what really knocks it out of the park, especially in the latter half, are the visual effects, especially in the conclusion. So in the latter half of the movie, and especially the final scenes, we see some really good visual effects, like really well done, utilizing a lot of color that are really mesmerizing to watch. And that kind of makes for like a really satisfying ending. And it really feels like we're reaching the end of a rising action. And when it finishes, we've got like a clear final scene, a clear denouement that really works well, I think, in the end. So overall, I enjoyed this movie. I enjoyed watching it to the end and seeing what happened. So that's it for today's review. I'll be doing another one soon. And if you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe.